We often speak of dogs through the habit of ownership. We name them, schedule their lives, assign them a place in the house, and we say they belong to us. But if you pause for a moment, that language begins to feel slightly off, because anyone who has truly lived with a dog knows that whatever is taking place there does not sit comfortably inside the idea of ownership. It is something closer to a relationship than a possession. Those who've encountered what they might call a soul dog know this immediately. There is a bond that resists explanation, just steady, unmistakably real. In a world where human beings so easily hurt one another, where trust is bargained, loyalty offered only when it is safe, and affection given out in careful portion, there exists a creature that seems to move by an entirely different rhythm. A dog does not calculate. It does not compare. It does not stand back to see whether love will be returned in equal measure. Its presence is not strategic. It is simply present. And this leaves us with an unsettling thought. If such a way of being exists so close to us, walking at our side, resting at our feet, sharing our ordinary days, then perhaps the deeper question is not why we keep them, but why we were given them at all. Why out of the vast movement of life it would choose to walk so closely beside us. To understand what it means to have a dog in your life, we may first have to let go of the idea that a dog is a pet. The term itself performs a subtle reduction. It classifies, organizes, and implies ownership, something to be managed, trained, perhaps optimized. Yet this framework fails to account for what is actually taking place. A dog is not merely an object within one's life, but a mode of existence, a different way of being placed beside your own. And this contrast matters, because human beings tend to inhabit a divided condition. We are rarely fully present where we are. We exist partly in memory, replaying what has already happened, and partly in anticipation, imagining what might come next. Most of the time, we are not here at all. A dog, on the other hand, appears to live almost entirely in what is happening. There is no visible concern with who it used to be, no evident anxiety about who it must become, no personal narrative being quietly maintained in the background. So when you sit next to a dog, something rather unusual occurs. Two modes of consciousness meet. There you are, thinking, commenting, explaining things to yourself, and there the dog is simply responding to what's happening. The dog isn't asking, am I enough? It isn't wondering where this relationship is going, and when it looks at you, it isn't measuring you against who you used to be or who you think you should become. It meets what is there. And that's why the connection feels so immediate, because the dog isn't relating to your identity, your past, or your ambitions. It's relating to your presence. So in that sense, you don't really own a dog. You do not truly own such a creature. You are, for a time, entrusted with a being that already knows how to exist. When you look closely, humans have a very curious relationship with love. We almost never let it stay simple. We think about it. We manage it. We turn it into something that needs to be secured. Without quite noticing, we begin to add conditions. I'll stay if you stay. I'll love you if you change. I'll give you loyalty if you reassure me. And before long, love becomes a kind of quiet agreement. Not spoken aloud, but carefully in the mind. A subtle contract we're always renegotiating. Now, there's nothing especially wrong with this. It's understandable. Human beings live with memory, with anticipation, with fear of being hurt again. So we learn to protect ourselves the only way we know how, but then right beside us appears a creature that doesn't seem to be playing this game at all. A dog doesn't arrive with expectations about who you should become. It doesn't seem concerned with your reputation, your past mistakes, or your plans for the future. It doesn't love you because of something it simply loves. Not as a virtue, not as a moral achievement, but as its natural way of being in the world. And this is what theologians have always pointed toward when they speak of grace. Love without prerequisite. Love that does not need to be earned, justified, or explained. A dog lives in this state effortlessly, which may be why dogs make such poor theologians. They don't need belief systems. They don't require doctrines. They are already embodying the thing religion struggles to describe. So perhaps God did not place dogs beside human beings to teach obedience or responsibility, but to set beside us a living reminder of what love looks like before conditions ever enter the picture. Not an idea, not a rule, but a presence. In this sense, the dog becomes a kind of spiritual anchor. Seen from a deeper angle, dogs prevent human beings from floating too far away into the world of their own ideas. We are remarkably good at living inside concepts, inside explanations, conclusions, and stories about ourselves, while forgetting the simple fact of being here. Now, many spiritual traditions speak of awakening in very modest language, not as a flash of light, but as presence, as a willingness to stop arguing with what is already taking place, as a gentle trust in this moment, exactly as it appears. And this, of course, is where the dog has always been. A dog does not rehearse grievances. It does not construct a memory palace of wounds. It returns almost immediately, even after pain. Not because it is unaware, but because it does not live by calculation. The dog does not punish absence. It does not withdraw affection as a lesson. It does not interpret vulnerability as failure. This is often mistaken for foolishness. But it is not ignorance. It is not naive. It is a certain clarity of heart, a way of meeting life without armor and without delay. Human beings often notice this and say, half-jokingly, dogs are better than people. But the deeper truth is more unsettling than that. Dogs are not better than humans. They are what humans look like when fear has not yet learned how to take control of the heart. And this is why losing a dog hurts as deeply as it does. The grief often feels out of proportion, almost embarrassing in its intensity. But that's only because the bond itself was never built out of words. You didn't love your dog through ideas. You loved through rhythm, through routine, through presence, through the sound of familiar footsteps, through touch, through shared silence that didn't need to explain itself. So when a dog leaves, you don't lose a story. You don't lose a role or a narrative. You lose a way of being. It is as if innocence itself has slipped away, leaving behind the absence of something that once required no explanation to feel safe. This is why people often say, "He knew me better than anyone." And what they mean is not that the dog understood their opinions, or their history, or the character they present to the world. A dog never knew your persona. It knew your tone, your breath, the subtle shifts in your body when you were anxious or at ease. A dog knows when you are unsafe with yourself, and it stays. So the grief is not only for the animal that is gone, but for the self that once knew how to settle, without defense or justification, in the simple presence of another living being. That is what is being mourned. Not companionship alone, but unconditional safety, experienced without words. Eventually, you notice something that doesn't quite sit right. Why does a creature like this pass through life so quickly? Why does life allow something so transparent to remain only for a while. But perhaps this is not an accident. Dogs do not break our hearts by mistake. They break them by design. If love never ended, we would treat it casually. We would confuse it with ownership. We would assume it belonged to us. But because it ends, love is revealed as something else entirely, not a possession, but a participation. Not something we keep, but something we enter for a time. A dog's brief life quietly teaches what no philosophy lecture ever quite manages to say. That presence matters more than duration. That depth is not measured in years. That grief is not a failure of love, but its price. We often imagine grief as the opposite of love. But in truth, grief is love that has nowhere to go. In this sense, dogs are not meant to stay forever. They are temporary teachers, not permanent companions. They arrive. They give themselves completely. They complete the lesson, and then they leave, returning us to the question we would rather avoid: can we love fully, knowing in advance that it will end? A dog answers that question not with words, but by living it briefly, beautifully, and without regret. There is another way of looking at this whole business, and it isn't a particularly comfortable one. You see, a dog doesn't really belong to you, even though the language insists that it does. My dog, we say, as though life itself were something that could be owned. But if you watch carefully, the relationship doesn't behave like ownership at all. It behaves more like a temporary arrangement. For a short while, two lives run alongside one another. They share mornings, habits, silences, and in that time something subtle happens. The dog has a curious effect on you, not because it tries to improve you, but because it doesn't. It draws you out of abstraction and back into immediacy. It interrupts your seriousness. It softens the edges that living tends to harden. And then, just as you begin to assume this will go on indefinitely, it stops, and we call this a tragedy. But from another point of view, it was never meant to be otherwise. The arrangement was always temporary. The mistake is thinking the purpose was permanence. It wasn't. Humans often imagine they are rescuing dogs, saving them, giving them a better life. But one could just as easily say that dogs appear at precisely the moments when humans are in danger of becoming a little too calculating, a little too mechanical, a little too certain, and when that danger has passed, the dog goes on its way, quite naturally. And perhaps what matters most isn't the dog at all, but what its presence keeps pointing toward. When your dog looks at you, tail moving, eyes open, completely unguarded, there is no calculation there, no request, no plan. It is not asking, will you protect me, or will you stay? It is asking something far more difficult than that. Can you live like this too? Can you arrive without armor? Can you stay without guarantees? Can you love without trying to control what happens next? If you can, even briefly, then the dog has already done what it came to do, because it was never here to be fixed or trained into perfection. It was here to remind. If God could speak through a dog, it would not argue, it would not explain itself, it would not ask you to believe anything. It would say, stop thinking, sit here, I'm with you. And this is enough. You can't ask for change and expect everything to be the same. It sounds obvious, and yet this is exactly what most of us secretly hope for. Think about that for a moment. We say we want a new life, a new beginning, a new self. But secretly, we want it delivered without disturbance. We want the comfort of the old world and the excitement of a new one, both at once. And isn't that what makes us suffer? This strange wish that things improve but nothing be touched? We ask for growth, but hope the ground never shakes. We pray for love, but dread the risk of heartbreak. We want to fly, yet still keep our feet safely on the earth. Life doesn't work like that. Change always rearranges. It doesn't slip quietly into the room while you sleep. It comes like a tide, sometimes gentle, sometimes like a storm, carrying away pieces of who you once were. And the funny thing is, while it's happening, it really feels like a blessing. It feels like loss, confusion, even betrayal. It makes you cry out and ask, why me? Why now? When you ask for change, you are asking for a kind of death, the death of who you were, of how things used to be. And only through that death can something new be born. Every wish is a disturbance. The moment you ask for something, you have already set a ripple into motion. The universe is not deaf, it hears you always. But here is the trick. It rarely answers in the way you imagine. We think asking is like placing an order at a restaurant. You say, I want love, I want success, I want peace, and you expect it to arrive neatly, served on a silver plate. But life is not a waiter. It is more like a teacher. It doesn't hand you answers. It hands you the conditions to discover them. So when you ask for strength, you don't receive strength. Instead, you face difficulties that force you to grow strong. You ask for wisdom, and life doesn't whisper secrets into your ear. It hands you problems, riddles, paradoxes, so that in solving them, wisdom takes root in you. You ask for courage, and suddenly you find yourself standing in front of fear. When you ask for love, you don't receive a flawless angel. You receive another imperfect human, so that through patience, forgiveness, and tenderness, love may grow in you. The universe always answers, but its answers are disguised, wrapped in paradox, often mistaken for curses when in truth they are invitations. This is why so often we cry out, I asked for light, and all I got was darkness. But the darkness is not punishment. It is the soil in which the light will take root. To ask, then, is dangerous, because you will always be answered, but never in the way your ego expects. And if you are not ready, you might miss the gift inside the disguise. Imagine for a moment that every wish of yours came true the instant you thought it. No waiting, no effort, no uncertainty. You imagine a house. It appears. Another house, another car, another success, all lined up like toys in a row. At first you would feel triumphant, powerful, a God in control of all things. But after the 100th repetition, the thrill would fade, and by the 1000th it would turn to ash in your mouth, because when everything comes easy, nothing means anything. The first house you build fills you with pride. The second makes you ambitious, but the 1000th, you stop caring. You might even find it more interesting to abandon them all, to sleep under the stars on some quiet mountain, simply because there is still mystery there. The sweetness of life is not in the having, but in the journey of becoming. The chase, the uncertainty, the obstacles, these are not interruptions. They are the very flavor of existence. We forget this when we cry out for ease, for safety, for guarantees. We think we want a life without trouble, but secretly we would be bored to death by it. Like watching a movie where every scene ends happily, predictable, flat, meaningless. The paradox is that challenge, even suffering, is what gives your joy its depth. Without contrast, there is no color. Without shadow, no light. So the universe, in its strange wisdom, protects you from a meaningless life by refusing to make it too easy. It withholds the instant win, not as punishment, but as mercy, because it knows without the climb you would never taste the summit. Life, at its core, is not a problem to be solved, but a play to be experienced. And like every play, it needs contrast. You cannot know light unless you have tasted the dark. You cannot know joy without having brushed against sorrow. Success means nothing to the one who has never stumbled. Even love, the thing we prize most, shines brightest only after we've known loneliness. This is why challenges are not detours on the road of life. They are the road. They carve depth into us, like rivers carving valleys. They give shape to the landscape of our soul. Without them, we would remain flat, unshaped, undefined. But here's the secret most of us miss. The universe is playful. It is not only teaching, it is also dancing. The struggle you face is not a punishment handed down from above. It is a game in which you are both the player and the prize. Think of it like music. A song without tension, without rhythm, without high and low notes would be unbearable to listen to. It is the rise and fall, the dissonance and harmony that makes it beautiful. Life is no different. So when you ask, why must there be difficulty? The answer is, because without it, you would never feel alive. The unpredictability, the surprises, even the tears. These are the spice of existence. In the middle of all this chaos, the changes, the struggles, the storms, there is something in you that does not move, something that watches. Call it the watcher, call it awareness, call it God within. The name doesn't matter. What matters is that it has always been there, quietly observing, untouched by the drama, waiting for you to notice. When you succeed, it watches. When you fail, it watches. When you cry out in despair, why me? It is still there, unshaken. This watcher is not against you. It learns through you. Every new perspective you gain, every mistake, every triumph becomes part of its expansion. The watcher knows the road, but it does not force your steps. You are free to choose, free to wander, free to fall and rise again. And there are no wrong choices, only lessons. You might think you failed, but to the watcher, you simply learned. You might think you wasted time, but to the watcher, time itself is the lesson. The tragedy is not in choosing wrongly. The tragedy is in refusing to choose at all. By sitting still, blaming the world, blaming others, blaming yourself, because in that stagnation, the dance stops. But the moment you turn inward, the moment you listen, you discover you were never abandoned. That silent awareness was with you in every storm, waiting patiently for you to surrender so it could guide you, and once you recognize it, even the hardest challenge softens, because you no longer fight it alone. There are, you could say, 3 levels of awareness in how we meet life's challenges. The lowest level is blame. Here, everything is someone else's fault. Your parents, your partner, society, the economy, the government, God. Life feels like a conspiracy against you. And while blame may feel comforting in the moment, it locks you in chains, because if everything is someone else's fault, then nothing is within your power to change. The second level is self-blame. This is where most people eventually land. They stop pointing fingers outward and begin pointing them inward. It must be me. I'm the problem. I'm not good enough, not strong enough, not smart enough. And while this feels more mature, it is still a prison, because guilt, just like blame, keeps you stuck, circling endlessly in self-punishment. But there is a third level, the highest. At this level, you blame no one, not the world, not yourself. You simply learn. You fall, you rise, you fall again, and each time you collect the lesson and keep moving. There is no guilt, no resentment, only growth. This is freedom. Not because life suddenly becomes easy, but because you stop wasting energy on resistance. You stop shouting at the storm, and instead learn how to sail in the wind. At this level, every experience, even the painful ones, becomes fuel for your becoming. If you have eyes to see, you begin to notice something astonishing. Nothing you ever asked for was ignored. Every prayer was heard. Every whisper was answered, just not in the way your mind expected. The confusion taught you how to see. The chaos trained you to find stillness within yourself. The heartbreak carved your heart open so that real love could enter. This is the secret we resist the most. Life does not give you the object of your desire, it gives you the transformation required to hold it. Because if you were simply handed love without depth, you would not know how to cherish it. If you were simply handed success without failure, you would not know how to sustain it. If you were simply handed peace without ever facing storms, you would not know how to trust it. What feels like unanswered prayers are in fact the most loving answers of all. Not no, not even not yet, but rather become first, grow into it, then it will be yours. And maybe this is why faith is so hard. Because it requires you to believe that the very thing that feels like your undoing is in truth your making. So, the real miracle is not that prayers are answered. The real miracle is that they are answered with more wisdom than we would ever dare ask for. Every desire you carry is really a seed. And a seed does not become a tree in an instant. It must be buried, cracked open, broken apart by the soil, before it ever reaches the light. This is the part of the journey most of us resist. We want the fruit without the breaking, the harvest without the season of waiting. But life doesn't work like that. You don't just receive your dream. You become the kind of person who can live it, breathe it, carry it. If you want success, life will train you in persistence, discipline, and failure, so that when success comes, you won't collapse under its weight. If you want peace, life will send you storms, so that when peace comes, you'll recognize it not as escape, but as strength. The greater journey is never about collecting things. It is about becoming someone who can dance with uncertainty, who can carry both joy and sorrow without breaking, who can love even when it hurts. And through it all, life will always be shaping you into the person you were meant to become. And all along, the watcher within you, the silent presence, the divine awareness, has never left your side. It was guiding, shaping, and waiting for you to see that you were never alone. So love your challenges, love your lessons, love even the things that break you. Because one day you will look back and realize nothing was wasted. Everything was part of the journey. That all along, what you thought was against you was secretly working for you. So be at peace. Be grateful. And remember, the whole point was always to dance.
There comes a peculiar moment in one's life when joy simply vanishes. Not suddenly, like a door slamming shut, but gradually, like a room dimming without anyone touching the lights. You look around and everything is technically the same. The people you used to laugh with are still there. The hobbies you loved still exist. The world has not changed its shape. And yet, you feel as though something essential has slipped quietly out of your hands. You wake up and the day feels flat. You sit among things that used to spark curiosity and nothing happens. You listen to music that once made your chest bloom with feeling, and it now passes through you like wind through an empty house. Conversations feel muffled. Activities feel distant. Even happiness feels like a memory someone else once told you. You begin to wonder, what's wrong with me? Why does nothing bring me joy anymore? This is perhaps one of the most frightening questions a human being can face, because it touches the deepest fear of all, the fear that something in you has broken. But what if the opposite is true? What if nothing brings you joy because something in you is finally working? You see, joy is not something you manufacture. It is something that arises naturally when you are aligned with your own life. It comes uninvited, like a bird singing on your windowsill. You don't have to force it, and you certainly don't have to chase it. Joy is the fragrance of a life lived from the center of oneself. So, when joy disappears, it is not because you have failed. It is because something in you is shifting. Something is dissolving. Something is releasing its grip. There is a phase of awakening that no one likes to talk about. A phase where the colors of life fade, the meaning drains out of your ambitions, and the things you once depended on for emotional nourishment no longer satisfy you. You feel empty, unmoved, disconnected, as though the world has stepped away from you. But what has really happened is that you have stepped away from the world you created before you understood yourself. The numbness you feel is not the death of joy. It is the death of stimulation, the death of distraction, the death of an identity that was built to cope, to perform, to impress, to survive. You cannot find joy because you are no longer resonating with the version of yourself that used to seek it. Now, this stage feels terribly confusing. You may think you are depressed, or apathetic, or emotionally dull, but numbness is not a malfunction. Numbness is a signal. It means your inner system is shutting down outdated pathways. It is refusing to sustain the old narrative. It is pulling you inward, away from noise and toward truth. Imagine you are holding a cup filled with muddy water. The more you swirl it, the murkier it becomes. But if you allow it to become still, the sediment sinks. Clarity emerges from quiet, not from motion. In the same way, your joy sinks when life is asking you to be still, not because joy is gone, but because clarity needs space to surface. The absence of emotion is not the beginning of despair. It is the beginning of purification. You see, the universe is remarkably intelligent, far more intelligent than the thinking mind. And when the life you have been living no longer matches the truth of who you are becoming, the universe does a very gentle thing. It withdraws your excitement for that life. It takes away your enthusiasm, your craving, your emotional reward system, not to punish you, but to guide you toward a larger horizon. You cannot stay in old rooms once your soul has outgrown them. But because humans fear stillness, you interpret this withdrawal as a problem. You chase joy harder, only to feel it slip further through your hands. You try to recreate old pleasures, revive old habits, repeat old patterns, but joy does not return. And the more you force, the more exhausted you become. You begin to ask, why can't I feel anything? But stillness is not nothingness. It is information. It is your inner being saying, you must stop now. You must listen. You must see what is really happening. The collapse of joy is the first sign that the old you is dissolving. The identity you built to survive your childhood, or to satisfy society, or to earn validation, or to keep yourself safe, its time has run out. And the dissolution of an identity always feels like the dissolution of feeling, because for a moment you do not know who you are supposed to be. You are no longer the person you once were, but not yet the person you are becoming. This in-between space is emotionally quiet, and in the quiet, joy hides. Not because joy has left, but because it belongs to the self you are growing into, not the self you are shedding. Now, some people try to escape this phase. They try to feel something, anything, through distraction. They seek stimulation, drama, high highs, low lows, anything to convince themselves they are still alive. They fear the quiet because the quiet feels like emptiness. But emptiness is misunderstood. Emptiness is not the absence of life. It is the clearing of space for life to enter. It is the moment the soil is turned before new seeds are planted. You cannot grow anything on ground that is cluttered with old roots. So life uproots you. It empties you of old joy so that new joy can take root. This process is not comfortable, but it is necessary, because the joy you used to feel was not deep enough. It was joy based on external stimulation, joy based on identity, joy that depended on circumstances going your way, joy that could be taken from you. Life wants something more stable for you, something deeper, something that comes from within rather than from the world. And so it takes away the old joy, so you can discover a joy that rises from presence, not performance. And this transition is always prefaced by numbness. Before the heart can feel more, it must feel less. Before consciousness expands, it withdraws from the surface of things. Before the self awakens, it sleeps. This is why nothing brings you joy, because the part of you that used to chase joy is dissolving, and the part of you that will experience real joy has not yet fully awakened. Imagine a caterpillar. Before it becomes a butterfly, there is a moment when it is neither one nor the other. It dissolves entirely into a kind of living soup, a formless in-between. If it were capable of emotion, it might say, "Nothing feels meaningful anymore. I don't know what I am. I feel like nothing." But the caterpillar is not dying. It is reorganizing. You are reorganizing. The numbness is your cocoon. The emptiness is your metamorphosis. You are not losing joy. You are losing the version of yourself that required the world to provide it. And here is something even more subtle. The universe often removes joy when you have been living on borrowed energy, when you have been pushing yourself, ignoring yourself, betraying yourself in small ways, when you have been moving too fast for too long, when your nervous system is exhausted beyond what you can consciously admit. Sometimes nothing brings you joy because your body is simply tired, tired of enduring, tired of pretending, tired of performing optimism, tired of carrying the weight of expectations and emotional obligations, tired of trying to survive without rest. And so joy shuts down, not as a failure, but as protection. Your system cannot run on empty forever. It forces stillness when you refuse to give it willingly. This is why joylessness feels like being underwater. The world is muted because you are being asked to rest. You are being asked to face the quiet truth of your own exhaustion. Now, the mind resists this fiercely. It says, "I shouldn't feel this way. I should be excited. I should be productive. I should be grateful." But the universe is not interested in your shoulds. It is only interested in your truth. And truth often arrives disguised as stillness, because only in stillness can you finally hear what your life has been trying to tell you. When joy collapses, meaning begins to loosen. The things that once held your identity together no longer feel solid. You begin to question who you are, what you want, what you believe, and why you have lived the way you have lived. This questioning is not a crisis. It is clarity. It is the beginning of authenticity. To awaken is to feel the collapse of borrowed meaning, the collapse of external joy, the collapse of the old self. To awaken is to pass through numbness on the way to truth. And here is the great paradox. Joy disappears because you are finally ready to feel real joy, not the joy of excitement, but the joy of being, not the joy of pleasure, but the joy of presence, not the joy of escape, but the joy of awareness. Real joy does not rise quickly. It rises slowly, like a tide. It rises from quiet, and before it rises, the shoreline must be cleared. This clearing is happening now. You are not broken. You are being prepared. You are not emotionally dead. You are emotionally resetting. You are not losing yourself. You are shedding yourself. The reason nothing brings you joy is because the old you can no longer be satisfied with the world that once comforted it. Your sensitivity is changing. Your awareness is deepening. Your soul is taking the steering wheel from your persona. And personas do not surrender joyfully. So the universe removes joy. It removes stimulation. It removes old meaning. It removes everything you used to lean on. And in that removal, you begin to stand on the ground of yourself for the first time. There is a point, usually after the numbness has lingered longer than you thought you could endure, when something almost imperceptible begins to shift. It does not arrive loudly. It does not announce itself with fireworks or dramatic emotion. It comes in the smallest way, so subtle that you nearly miss it. A moment where your breath feels slightly deeper. A moment where the world looks a touch less flat. A moment where a sound or a glimpse of light stirs something faint in your chest. It is not joy itself, but the space joy will return to. You see, before joy can return, the place inside you that receives joy has to be rebuilt. The old structure collapsed with your old identity, and you cannot feel joy through an identity that is dissolving. Joy cannot enter a house that is being rebuilt. The foundation must be cleared, the walls must be undone, the windows must be opened. This is the work that numbness does. Numbness is the renovation of the inner world. And once the renovation reaches a certain point, you begin to feel again. Not fully, not dramatically, but honestly. This is the first sign that you have entered the second phase of awakening, the phase where your emotional life begins to reorganize itself around presence rather than identity. You begin to sense that beneath the quiet, something is alive, something is breathing, something is waiting for you to slow down enough to notice it. You may wake up one morning and find that the silence feels less like emptiness and more like spaciousness. You may look at the sky and feel a faint recognition of beauty, not because the sky changed, but because your capacity to perceive it is returning. You may sit with yourself and feel a softness that was unavailable to you before. This is how the new joy approaches, not as excitement, but as gentleness, not as a high, but as a deepening. Joy begins to return as presence. Presence is the ability to inhabit your own life without the filter of expectation or fear. It is the ability to feel without interpreting, without managing, without controlling. Presence is the purest form of awareness. It is the ground of all real joy. Now, at first, this presence can feel unfamiliar. You are used to emotion arriving in waves, in highs and lows, in bursts of enthusiasm or disappointment. But presence brings a different flavor of experience. It is quieter, steadier, more patient. It does not intoxicate. It does not overwhelm. It simply reveals. And so joy shuts down, not as a failure, but as protection. Your system cannot run on empty forever. It forces stillness when you refuse to give it willingly. This is why joylessness feels like being underwater. The world is muted because you are being asked to rest. You are being asked to face the quiet truth of your own exhaustion. Now, the mind resists this fiercely. It says, I shouldn't feel this way. I should be excited. I should be productive. I should be grateful. But the universe is not interested in your shoulds. It is only interested in your truth. And truth often arrives disguised as stillness, because only in stillness can you finally hear what your life has been trying to tell you. When joy collapses, meaning begins to loosen. The things that once held your identity together no longer feel solid. You begin to question who you are, what you want, what you believe, and why you have lived the way you have lived. This questioning is not a crisis, it is clarity. It is the beginning of authenticity. To awaken is to feel the collapse of borrowed meaning, the collapse of external joy, the collapse of the old self. To awaken is to pass through numbness on the way to truth. And here is the great paradox. Joy disappears because you are finally ready to feel real joy, not the joy of excitement, but the joy of being. Not the joy of pleasure, but the joy of presence. Not the joy of escape, but the joy of awareness. Real joy does not rise quickly. It rises slowly, like a tide. It rises from quiet, and before it rises, the shoreline must be cleared. This clearing is happening now. You are not broken. You are being prepared. You are not emotionally dead. You are emotionally resetting. You are not losing yourself. You are shedding yourself. The reason nothing brings you joy is because the old you can no longer be satisfied with the world that once comforted it. Your sensitivity is changing. Your awareness is deepening. Your soul is taking the steering wheel from your persona. And personas do not surrender joyfully. So the universe removes joy. It removes stimulation. It removes old meaning. It removes everything you used to lean on. And in that removal, you begin to stand on the ground of yourself for the first time. There is a point, usually after the numbness has lingered longer than you thought you could endure, when something almost imperceptible begins to shift. It does not arrive loudly. It does not announce itself with fireworks or dramatic emotion. It comes in the smallest way, so subtle that you nearly miss it. A moment where your breath feels slightly deeper. A moment where the world looks a touch less flat. A moment where a sound or a glimpse of light stirs something faint in your chest. It is not joy itself, but the space joy will return to. You see, before joy can return, the place inside you that receives joy has to be rebuilt. The old structure collapsed with your old identity, and you cannot feel joy through an identity that is dissolving. Joy cannot enter a house that is being rebuilt. The foundation must be cleared, the walls must be undone, the windows must be opened. This is the work that numbness does. Numbness is the renovation of the inner world. And once the renovation reaches a certain point, you begin to feel again. Not fully, not dramatically, but honestly. This is the first sign that you have entered the second phase of awakening, the phase where your emotional life begins to reorganize itself around presence rather than identity. You begin to sense that beneath the quiet, something is alive, something is breathing, something is waiting for you to slow down enough to notice it. You may wake up one morning and find that the silence feels less like emptiness and more like spaciousness. You may look at the sky and feel a faint recognition of beauty, not because the sky changed, but because your capacity to perceive it is returning. You may sit with yourself and feel a softness that was unavailable to you before. This is how the new joy approaches, not as excitement, but as gentleness, not as a high, but as a deepening. Joy begins to return as presence. Presence is the ability to inhabit your own life without the filter of expectation or fear. It is the ability to feel without interpreting, without managing, without controlling. Presence is the purest form of awareness. It is the ground of all real joy. Now, at first, this presence can feel unfamiliar. You are used to emotion arriving in waves, in highs and lows, in bursts of enthusiasm or disappointment. But presence brings a different flavor of experience. It is quieter, steadier, more patient. It does not intoxicate. It does not overwhelm. It simply reveals. You begin to see that joy was never lost. It was simply waiting for you to return. The return of joy is the return of truth, the return of alignment, the return of the part of you that was buried beneath effort and identity. It does not matter how long you have been numb. It does not matter how deeply you believe something was wrong with you. Life has been reorganizing you in the dark, preparing you, softening you, bringing you to a place where joy can be recognized again, not as a burst of emotion, but as the quiet radiance of being awake. You see, joylessness is not the opposite of joy. It is the purification of joy. It is the space where old meanings dissolve so new ones can emerge. It is the silence before the deeper life begins. And now you stand at the threshold of that deeper life, a life in which you do not chase feeling, but allow feeling, a life where you do not grasp at joy, but recognize joy in everything, a life where you understand that joy is not something you find, but something you become. Because when the old you falls away, and the noise dissolves, and the numbness clears, you discover something astonishing. Joy was never in the world. It was always in your awareness of the world, and now that awareness is being restored. Not as it was before, but as something new, something deeper, something clearer, something truer. What returns now is not excitement. What returns now is not stimulation. What returns now is the simple miracle of being alive. This is the joy that cannot be taken from you. This is the joy that arises when you stop chasing and begin listening. This is the joy that emerges when you finally meet your life without resistance. This is the joy that was waiting for you in the silence. And now, because you have passed through the numbness, because you have been emptied, because you have surrendered the old identity, you can finally feel what was here all along. A joy that does not shout, a joy that does not vanish, a joy that does not depend on anything, a joy that simply is. This is the return. This is the rebirth. This is the beginning of a life lived from the center of yourself. And this is where joy begins. It is a most peculiar thing, you see, that a human being can spend an entire lifetime searching for themselves while never realizing they were never truly lost. And yet that is the great game we are all playing, the cosmic game of hide and seek. The universe pretending not to be itself, wandering through space and time in the disguise of you and me. Now, somewhere along the way, we forgot this game. We began to take the disguise rather seriously. We began to believe that this mask we wear, this name, this history, this bundle of memories was who we really are. And so the play became a tragedy. Because when the actor forgets he's in a play, the suffering feels very real indeed. But let us begin at the beginning, if such a thing can be said to exist. Imagine, if you will, the moment you were born, not the event itself, but the sense of entering a world that was already in motion. Nobody asked you if you wished to be here. You arrived as a mystery, blinking into a mystery. And the first thing you learned, almost immediately, was that you were something separate. The doctor said, "It's a boy," or "It's a girl." Someone gave you a name. Someone said, "This is you." And in that instant, the great forgetting began. You see, the child does not know that there is a line between itself and the world. When a baby cries, it believes the universe is crying. When it laughs, it believes the whole sky is laughing with it. But very soon, we are taught otherwise. We are told where we end and where everything else begins. That's the first illusion, that there is an inside and an outside, that you are here and the world is there. We even speak of it that way. I came into this world. But that's not how it happened at all. You did not come into this world. You came out of it in precisely the same way a wave comes out of the ocean or a leaf grows out of a tree. You are not a stranger here. You are the universe expressing itself as this particular form for a while. And yet, because of language, because of conditioning, because of fear, we begin to imagine ourselves as isolated fragments. We identify with the body, with the name, with the narrative, and we say, I am this, and nothing more. But tell me, where exactly does this I begin? If I draw a line around your body, is that truly the border of you? Because the air you breathe becomes your blood, and your blood becomes your thought, and your thought changes the world around you. So where do you stop and the world begin? It's quite impossible to say, isn't it? The whole thing is one continuous process, yet our minds have divided it up for convenience. We draw lines, make maps, categorize, define. But the map, you see, is never the territory. The word is never the thing. The idea of you is not you. And yet, we have mistaken the symbol for the reality. This is why people suffer. Because we have been hypnotized by words, by images, by the great myth of separateness. The ancient Hindus called this Maya, the illusion that tricks consciousness into believing it is something apart from itself. And from this illusion springs all the great human dramas: fear, greed, ambition, loneliness, the endless craving to become something more. When you think you are a separate being, the universe becomes a threat. Everything outside is either something to be conquered or something to be avoided. You must protect yourself. You must compete. You must achieve. And so you spend your life struggling to survive, never realizing that the very energy of that struggle is the same energy that moves the stars. It is rather like a wave on the ocean trying not to be wet. The wave says, I must maintain my shape, my identity. I must fight against all the other waves. And in doing so, it forgets that it is the ocean itself. You and I are doing exactly that. We have become obsessed with being somebody rather than simply being. Now, this forgetting is not a mistake. It's part of the game. The universe hides itself from itself so that it can experience the joy of rediscovery. The darkness is necessary for light to recognize itself. The silence gives meaning to sound. And in the same way, forgetting who you are is the prelude to awakening. But the tragedy of our modern life is that we've made the forgetting permanent. We have built entire civilizations around the idea of separation. We have systems that reward competition and punish stillness. We have machines that amplify distraction. We measure worth in numbers, and we mistake productivity for purpose. And so, the game has lost its laughter, the play has forgotten its script. You can see this in the way people live. They move as if haunted, always chasing, always becoming, never arriving. They think salvation lies in the next promotion, the next purchase, the next achievement. But every time they reach the next thing, it dissolves like mist, because what they are truly searching for cannot be owned, cannot be earned, cannot even be found. It can only be remembered. And so the question arises, who or what is it that has forgotten? Who is this I that believes it is lost? If you look closely, you'll find something extraordinary. You'll find that the one who seeks is the very thing being sought. You'll find that beneath all the noise and confusion, there is a silence watching everything. That silence is what you truly are. When you close your eyes at night and the whole world disappears, that silence remains. When your thoughts fade for a brief moment, something is still there, isn't it? The awareness that notices the absence of thought, that's you. Not the story, not the name, not the body, the awareness itself, that which never comes and never goes. But we are so accustomed to looking outward that we miss it. We keep expecting truth to appear in some grand revelation when it has been quietly humming beneath everything all along, like a song that never ends, only changes its tune. And so, to remember who you are is not to add something new. It is to remove what was never real. It is to peel away the layers of conditioning, fear, and pretense until only the simple fact of being remains. That is where the journey truly begins, not in acquiring, but in noticing, not in striving, but in seeing clearly. You cannot become yourself because you already are. You can only wake up to that fact. And when you do, life begins to feel less like a prison and more like a play. The actors are the same, the scenery unchanged, but suddenly the story is light again. The laughter returns. The wave remembers it is the ocean. That is the beginning of remembering. That is the end of the dream of separation. When you awaken, even for a moment, to the truth of what you are, something remarkable happens. The world does not change, and yet it is utterly transformed. The same faces pass by, the same routines unfold, but there is a new quality to it all, a kind of luminous playfulness, as if the universe has been holding its breath, waiting for you to notice the joke. But it doesn't end there, because the moment we catch a glimpse of truth, the mind rushes in to claim it. It says, "Ah, I understand now. I've figured it out." And that, you see, is the second forgetting. The ego, clever as ever, puts on spiritual clothing and pretends to have seen the light. It becomes the seeker who has found. But remember, the moment you think you've captured truth, you've already lost it. Truth cannot be caught because it is what is doing the catching. It's a very curious situation. The more earnestly you pursue enlightenment, the more it recedes from you. Like chasing your own shadow, the harder you try, the further it slips away. Because you are what you seek. You are the awareness that is looking. And so, to look for yourself is a kind of cosmic comedy. The eye cannot see itself directly, only by reflection. This is why so many spiritual traditions emphasize stillness. Not stillness as in rigid quietness, but the stillness of understanding that there's nowhere to go, that the very act of seeking keeps the illusion alive. To sit quietly and observe is to see that the one doing the seeking is made of the same stuff as the sky, as the wind, as the stars. But here's where the pretending comes in. Even after this realization, life continues. You still have to eat, work, speak, love, and lose. You still stub your toe. You still get caught in emotion. You still wake up in the middle of the night wondering what it all means. The difference is subtle but profound. You now know it's a play. You still act your part, but you no longer mistake the mask for the face. You see, life is not something you overcome. It's something you dance with. The waves do not resist the tide. They move in harmony with it. So, too, does the awakened person move with life, not against it, not above it, but with it. To live this way is to rediscover innocence. A childlike wonder returns, not because you are naive, but because you are no longer cynical. You begin to see that everything is part of the same unfolding. The pain, the joy, the confusion, even the boredom, all of it belongs. All of it is the universe pretending to be separate, pretending to forget, so it can rediscover itself anew. But beware, the mind loves to make a project out of awakening. It says, now I must maintain my spiritual state, I must be mindful all the time. And so it creates yet another identity, the enlightened self. But that too is part of the game. The pretending continues, only now it's cloaked in holiness. The only way out is to see that there is no way out. You cannot escape the play because you are the play. You cannot stop pretending because pretending is part of what you are. The trick, then, is not to end the pretending, but to enjoy it, to see through it without denying it, to laugh at the cosmic joke rather than trying to explain it. Think of life as a grand symphony. Each note, each instrument has its place. Some play melodies, others dissonance. But the beauty lies in the whole, not in any single part. You are both the music and the musician, the listener and the sound. And to live with that awareness is to move through life with a certain grace, not the stiff grace of discipline, but the flowing grace of trust. Trust is the highest form of intelligence. It's not blind belief, it's participation. It's saying yes to the unknown. It's stepping into the rhythm without needing to know the choreography. Because when you trust the flow of life, you find it carries you exactly where you need to be. This doesn't mean you never fall. Of course you fall. But now you understand that even falling is part of the dance. You understand that pain is not punishment, it's the universe moving through you, rearranging, refining, renewing. Every tear, every stumble is another reminder that you are alive. And perhaps that's what we forget most easily, that to be alive is not to be perfect, but to participate. The stars burn and collapse, the trees grow and decay, everything changes, and that change is not a flaw, it's the very expression of beauty. In the end, awakening is not about rising above life, but sinking fully into it. It's not about being calm all the time, but about being real all the time. It's about allowing the whole spectrum of existence to play through you, the laughter, the fear, the tenderness, the confusion, and recognizing that you are not any single note, but the silence from which all of them arise. And so, when you remember who you are, you don't vanish into some mystical void. You re-enter the world with open eyes. You smile at the absurdity of it all. You forgive more easily. You laugh more deeply. You become softer, not weaker. Wiser, not detached. You realize that love is not a feeling, but a way of seeing. You begin to recognize yourself everywhere, in the eyes of the stranger, in the sound of the rain, in the passing wind, because how could you not? The one who once believed they were lost now sees that there was nowhere to go. The one who searched the stars now sees that the light was always within. The pretending continues. But now it is joyful. You play your part beautifully because you know it's a part. You cry when the story calls for tears, and you laugh when the scene becomes absurd. And when the curtain falls, you bow not in defeat, but in gratitude. For you have remembered the secret. The universe keeps whispering that it was you all along. And so, the remembering deepens. For what begins as a glimpse slowly ripens into a way of being, a quiet knowing that hums beneath everything you do. You still move through the world as a person, with a name and a story, but something within you no longer clings so tightly to that story. You wear it lightly now, as you would a costume at a festival. You play your part with sincerity, but you no longer mistake it for who you truly are. This is where the real transformation begins, not in grand revelations or supernatural moments, but in the smallest, most ordinary acts. Making tea, walking through the rain, waiting at a stoplight. You start to notice how extraordinary the ordinary really is. The smell of earth after a storm, the texture of a wooden table beneath your hand, the faint echo of laughter drifting through a window. You begin to live with an intimacy that no philosophy can capture. This is what the mystics mean when they speak of heaven on earth. It is not a place elsewhere. It is this very life, seen clearly, without the veil of judgment or expectation. To live this way is to rediscover wonder. You see that everything, absolutely everything, is sacred because it exists. Even your own confusion, your sorrow, your restlessness, these too are part of the divine dance. But the mind, ever restless, will still try to intervene. It whispers that such peace cannot last, that surely this stillness will vanish. It begins to search for ways to hold on to the state of grace, to capture it like a photograph. Yet every attempt to hold on to stillness destroys it. For stillness is not something to be kept. It is what remains when there is no grasping. And so, you learn to let go again, not as a lesson, but as a rhythm. Letting go becomes breathing. Each inhale takes in the world, and each exhale releases your need to possess it. Life flows through you rather than around you. You realize there was never a separation to begin with, only the illusion of one. In this stage of awakening, something else happens. You begin to see that others, too, are pretending to be separate. Every stranger becomes a mirror, every argument a lesson, every act of cruelty a cry for recognition. You begin to sense the shared ache of humanity, the longing to return home to something that was never lost. This understanding births compassion, not as an effort, but as a natural response. You see yourself in others because you finally see others as yourself. Now, compassion is often misunderstood. It is not pity, nor is it a soft sentiment. True compassion carries clarity. It does not enable illusions, but gently reveals them. When you act from compassion, you do not seek to fix anyone. You simply offer presence, a quiet reminder that they, too, are enough. And that, you see, is often the greatest healing of all, to be reminded that nothing is missing. This realization begins to dissolve fear. Fear thrives on separation. It feeds on the illusion that there is something outside you that can destroy what you are. But when you see that life and death, gain and loss, are movements of the same ocean, what is there to fear? The wave cannot fall out of the sea. It may rise and fall, but it never ceases to be water. Imagine for a moment a leaf floating down a stream. The leaf does not resist the current. It does not complain about where it is taken. It moves gracefully, not because it understands the river's path, but because it trusts the flow. You, too, can live this way. You can let yourself be carried, not by resignation, but by participation. You move with life instead of against it, and in doing so, discover that the current was never against you. As this understanding deepens, even suffering begins to look different. You stop asking, "Why me?" and begin to wonder, "What is this showing me?" The pain doesn't vanish, but its meaning changes. It becomes a teacher, not an enemy. It softens the edges of the self, humbles the ego, opens the heart. You begin to see that the cracks are not signs of failure. They are the spaces through which the light enters. In time, even the idea of awakening fades. You no longer measure yourself against spiritual ideals or compare your progress to anyone else's. You simply live. You laugh when it's funny. You cry when it hurts. You fall. You rise. You begin again. You stop trying to be spiritual and start being human, which, ironically, is the most spiritual thing of all. The sages were never superhuman beings. They simply stopped pretending to be anything else. They embraced their humanity so fully that it became transparent, allowing the infinite to shine through it. To live like this is to understand that divinity is not somewhere else, waiting to be reached. It's here, looking out from behind your eyes, breathing through your lungs, pulsing in your veins. This is the quiet revolution of awareness. It doesn't announce itself with thunder or revelation. It arrives gently, like dawn through a half-open window. It changes everything by changing nothing, for it reveals that nothing needed changing. The self you were trying to fix was never broken. The world you were trying to save was never lost. To see this clearly is to rest at last. Not the rest of exhaustion, but the rest of arrival. You realize you've been home all along. Every detour, every mistake, every heartbreak was part of the journey back to what never moved. You laugh softly at the irony of it all, and in that laughter, a great peace arises. It's not the peace of escape, but the peace of inclusion. You can finally say yes to all of it, the confusion, the clarity, the birth, the death, the gain, the loss. You see that life's perfection is not in its smoothness, but in its completeness. It holds everything, and that wholeness is love. And so, you walk differently now. You no longer rush. You no longer grasp. You no longer wait for permission to be alive. You move through the world as a presence rather than a person, as an awareness rather than a role. And wherever you go, something silent and beautiful goes with you, reminding all who meet you that they, too, have never been lost. And then there comes a kind of quiet after the knowing, not the quiet of emptiness, but of fullness, as though life has finally exhaled and found itself resting in its own rhythm. You wake one morning and realize there is nothing left to search for. The seeking, the striving, even the idea of becoming someone better dissolves like mist in sunlight. You see, the moment you stop trying to arrive anywhere, you discover that you have always been here. This is the final unfolding of the journey, not a destination, but an absorption. The wave returns to the ocean, not by effort, but by remembering it was never apart. You, too, begin to live with that same natural ease. You no longer ask life for meaning, because you have become meaning itself. Everything you touch, everything you see, reflects the same still intelligence that lives within you. You start to laugh at the absurdity of the game we all play, the endless chase for validation, the frantic pursuit of success, the anxious clinging to permanence. You see it now as a cosmic dance, a play where the actors have simply forgotten it's a play. And rather than feeling superior or detached, you feel tenderness, because you remember what it was like to be caught in the script, to take every line so seriously. Compassion deepens, not as a virtue, but as understanding. You begin to notice that the boundaries between you and life are melting. The wind moves, and it feels like your breath. The rain falls, and it feels like your tears. Someone smiles on the street, and it feels like your own joy shining back at you. It's as if the whole world has turned into a mirror, reflecting only one truth. There was never two. And what becomes of fear in such a place? It loses its hold. Not because you have conquered it, but because you see through it. You see that fear was always a shadow cast by your forgetting. When you remember who you are, fear has nothing left to cling to. You realize that the great mystery of life has never been against you. It was only waiting for your cooperation. This doesn't make you invincible or indifferent. You still feel pain. You still grieve. You still stumble. But now there's a softness around it all, a kind of quiet trust that runs through every experience. You understand that sorrow and joy are not opposites, but two notes in the same song. You don't try to hold one or escape the other. You let them both play through you. And in that harmony, something timeless begins to hum. You realize that even death, that great unspoken fear, is not an ending but a rhythm, a return. It's the breath of the cosmos inhaling again. What you truly are cannot die because it was never born. It only takes form for a little while, to taste itself, to play. And when the play ends, it bows and becomes the stage once more. This understanding doesn't make you distant from the world. Quite the opposite. It draws you closer. You love more deeply, laugh more freely, forgive more easily. You no longer need to protect yourself from life, because you have recognized that you are life. Every moment becomes a prayer without words, an act of worship without worshipers. It's funny how we spend so much of our lives trying to control what was never ours. We fight the current, build walls, wear masks, and then one day you realize you don't have to do any of that anymore. You can let the river carry you. You can let the walls fall. You can let the masks drop. You can finally breathe. And in that breath, the world breathes with you. The trees sway in rhythm. The birds call in response. Even the silence feels alive. You begin to feel a subtle joy that asks for nothing, that depends on nothing. It's the joy of simply being. The kind of peace that doesn't need to be protected because it cannot be taken away. You look back at your life, all the mistakes, the detours, the heartbreaks, and you see the hidden intelligence woven through it all. Every fall was a doorway. Every delay, a redirection. Every ending, a beginning in disguise. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was wrong. It was all part of the unfolding, the remembering. And as you sit quietly, watching the sun dip below the horizon, you feel no need to hold on to it, no sorrow that it's fading, because you know it will rise again. Not because of belief, but because of rhythm. The same rhythm that moves your breath, that beats your heart, that carries the tides of the sea and the stories of your life. To live this way is not to transcend the human experience, but to be fully immersed in it without being consumed by it. You can taste the salt of tears and still smile. You can watch the seasons change without wishing them to stay. You can love without fear of loss, because you understand that love itself never leaves, only its forms change. This is what it means to awaken. Not to escape the dream, but to dream consciously. To know you are both the dreamer and the dream. You live in the world, but you are no longer bound by it. You participate in the drama, but you no longer mistake the stage for reality. You have come home to yourself, and in doing so, you have come home to the universe. And perhaps that's the most beautiful realization of all, that you were never lost, never broken, never unworthy. You were simply playing hide and seek with eternity, waiting for the moment when you'd stop searching and start seeing. Now you see, and seeing, you smile. Because the great secret, the one that sages have whispered through time, is beautifully simple. You are already what you seek. So you walk on, not to arrive, but to express, not to find meaning, but to reveal it. And as you walk, the universe walks with you, endlessly unfolding, endlessly returning, endlessly free.
You know, there's something quite extraordinary about the way we construct our sense of self. From the moment we begin to develop self-awareness as children, we start telling ourselves stories about who we are. And these stories, these narratives about our identity, become so deeply embedded, so thoroughly believed, that we never think to question them. We take them as absolute truth, as unchangeable facts about our nature. But here's what I want to suggest to you today. The most fundamental stories you tell yourself about who you are, the bedrock assumptions upon which you've built your entire sense of identity, are lies. Not malicious lies, not deliberate deceptions, but profound misunderstandings about the nature of your being. And these three lies, these three fundamental illusions, keep you trapped in patterns of suffering, limitation, and endless seeking. The extraordinary thing is that everyone believes these same three lies. They're universal delusions, passed down through culture, reinforced by society, embedded in language itself. And until you see through them, until you recognize them as the fictions they are, you remain imprisoned by them, living a life that's fundamentally based on falsehood. So let me tell you about these three lies. And as I describe them, I want you to watch your own reaction. Because the ego, the false self that's built on these lies, will immediately try to defend them. It will say, no, these aren't lies, this is just how things are. This is reality. And that defensive reaction is itself evidence of how deeply these lies have been believed. The first lie, and this is the foundation upon which the other two rest, is the lie that you are separate, that you are an isolated entity, a separate self, fundamentally divided from everything else that exists. You believe you are in here, behind your eyes, inside your skin, and the world is out there, separate from you, something you observe and interact with, but are fundamentally apart from. Now, on the surface, this seems obvious, doesn't it? Of course you're separate. You have your own body, your own thoughts, your own experiences. When you feel pain, others don't feel it. When you think, others don't hear your thoughts. The boundary of your skin seems to clearly mark where you end and not you begins. How could this possibly be a lie? But let me ask you something. Where exactly do you end and the rest of the universe begins? You might say at your skin,
but your skin is constantly exchanging molecules with the air. You're breathing in oxygen that was produced by trees, breathing out carbon dioxide that trees will use. The atoms in your body right now were once part of stars, part of the earth, part of countless other organisms. The food you ate yesterday is literally becoming you today. The bacteria in your gut, without which you couldn't survive, are they part of you or separate from you? You see, the boundary is completely arbitrary. It's a convention, a useful fiction, but not an actual division in reality. You are not a separate thing interacting with the universe. You are what the entire universe is doing at the point called here and now. Just as a wave is not separate from the ocean, but is the ocean waving, you are not separate from existence, but are existence expressing itself in this particular form, at this particular location, in this particular moment. But we've been conditioned from the earliest age to believe in separation. We're given a name, and we start to identify with that name as if it's what we are. We're told you and me and them, and language itself reinforces the illusion of separation with every sentence. We're taught to see ourselves as separate individuals, competing with other separate individuals for resources, for success, for love, for survival. And this lie of separation is the root of almost all suffering. Because when you believe you're separate, you're constantly defending your territory, protecting your interests, trying to get what you need from a world that seems foreign to you. You experience loneliness because you believe you're genuinely isolated. You experience fear because you're vulnerable, a small separate thing in a vast universe that doesn't care about you. You experience alienation because you never quite feel at home in a world you think you're separate from. But the moment you see through this lie, everything changes. Not because you gain something new, but because you lose an old delusion. You realize you've never been separate. You've never been alone. You've never been isolated. You are the universe experiencing itself. You are existence knowing itself. The division was imaginary. The separation was a story. And without that story, what remains is a sense of profound connection, of being at home everywhere, of belonging to everything. Now, the second lie builds directly on the first. This is the lie that you are consistent, that there's a continuous, unchanging you that persists through time. You believe there's a stable self, a constant identity that was there when you were 5 years old, is here now, and will be there when you're 80. You think of yourself as a thing, a noun, an entity that endures through all the changes of life. But is this actually true? Are you the same person you were 10 years ago? Are your thoughts the same? Your beliefs? Your body? Every cell in your body has been replaced multiple times over. Your opinions have changed. Your preferences have evolved. Your memories of your past have been rewritten countless times. So where is this continuous self? What you call yourself is actually a process, not a thing. It's a verb, not a noun. You are not a being. You are being. You're not a self. You're selfing. There's a continuous flow of experience, of sensation, of thought, of feeling, but there's no solid, unchanging entity having these experiences. There's just the experiencing itself. Think about it this way. When you look at a river, you give it a name. You call it the Mississippi or the Thames or the Ganges. But is it really the same river from moment to moment? The water that's flowing past you now will be miles away in an hour. New water is constantly flowing in. The river is never the same from one moment to the next. And yet we speak of it as if it's a single, continuous thing. You are like that river. You're a flowing process of thoughts, sensations, experiences, constantly changing, never the same from moment to moment. But you've been taught to think of yourself as a thing, as a solid entity, as a consistent self. And this lie creates enormous problems, because when you believe you're a fixed self, you become attached to particular ideas about who you are. You say, I am this kind of person. I am not that kind of person. And these definitions become a prison. You can't change, can't grow, can't become something new, because that would threaten your sense of identity. You have to defend who you think you are against any evidence that contradicts it. Moreover, this lie creates the illusion that you're in control of yourself. You think there's a you, a central controller, a captain of the ship, making decisions and running the show. But if you observe carefully, you'll notice that thoughts arise on their own. Feelings happen. Decisions emerge from conditions you didn't choose. There is no separate controller. There's just the process happening. And then thought comes in afterward and claims credit for it, saying, I did that, I thought that, I decided that. When you see through this second lie, when you recognize that you're a process rather than a thing, there's an incredible freedom. You're no longer trapped by outdated ideas about who you are. You're no longer burdened by the need to defend a consistent self-image. You're free to change, to flow, to be different in different circumstances. You realize you're not playing a fixed character in the drama of life. You're the drama itself, constantly improvising, constantly new. And now we come to the third lie, and this one is perhaps the most insidious. This is the lie that you are inadequate, that there's something wrong with you, that you need to become someone or something other than what you are, to be acceptable, to be worthy, to be complete. This lie is woven into the very fabric of our civilization. From the moment you're born, you're being measured, evaluated, judged. Are you developing properly? Are you meeting the milestones? Are you good enough? Smart enough? Attractive enough? Successful enough? The message is constant and clear. As you are right now, you're not quite right. You need to improve, to achieve, to become better. The entire economy runs on this lie. Advertising works by creating a sense of lack. You're not attractive enough, but buy this product and you will be. You're not successful enough, but get this degree, this job, this house, and you will be. You're not happy enough, but consume this experience, this substance, this entertainment, and you will be. The underlying message is always the same. You're not okay as you are. But if you do this or acquire that, then you'll finally be acceptable. Religion often reinforces this lie in different clothing. You're a sinner, you're fallen, you're separate from the divine, but if you follow these rules, perform these rituals, believe these doctrines, then you might become worthy. Even much of what passes for spirituality today is based on this same lie. You're not enlightened, you're not awakened, you're not conscious enough. But if you meditate enough, practice enough, purify enough, then you might finally become what you should be. But here's the truth that nobody wants you to know. You are already complete. You are already whole. There is nothing wrong with you. There never has been. The sense of inadequacy, the feeling that something is missing, the belief that you need to become something other than what you are, this is the lie. It's a fiction that's been implanted in you by a society that needs you to feel inadequate, so you'll keep striving, keep consuming, keep chasing. Now, I can already hear the objection. You might say, but I do have problems. I do have issues I need to work on. I do need to grow and improve. How can you say there's nothing wrong with me? And this is where we have to be very careful to understand what I'm actually saying. I'm not saying you can't learn new skills. I'm not saying you shouldn't address harmful behaviors. I'm not saying growth and development don't happen. What I'm saying is that at the fundamental level of your being, at the core of what you actually are, there is no inadequacy. The sense that you're fundamentally flawed, that at your core you're not good enough, this is the lie. You are an expression of existence itself. You are what the universe is doing right here, right now. And existence doesn't make mistakes. A tree doesn't worry that it's not a good enough tree. A river doesn't feel inadequate about its flowing. A bird doesn't doubt its worth. They simply are what they are, completely, fully, without self-consciousness or self-doubt. But human beings have developed this peculiar capacity for self-reflection, and we've used it to create an idea of what we should be, and then we've compared our actual experience to this idea, and we found ourselves wanting. We've created an ideal self, a perfect version we think we should be, and then we've felt bad about not being that. But the ideal is imaginary. It's a concept. It's not real. What's real is what you actually are in this moment. And what you actually are is the universe experiencing itself in human form. You are existence knowing itself. You are life living itself. And that is already completely sufficient, completely whole, completely acceptable. Not because you've achieved something, not because you've earned it, but because that's simply what is. When you see through this third lie, when you recognize that the sense of inadequacy is just a story you've been told and have believed, something remarkable happens. You stop the endless striving to become acceptable. You stop postponing your okayness until some future achievement. You recognize that you're already it, you've always been it, you couldn't be anything else. And paradoxically, when you stop trying to improve yourself to become acceptable, when you stop operating from a fundamental sense of lack, that's when real growth becomes possible. Not growth driven by fear and inadequacy, but growth that happens naturally, organically, like a plant growing toward the sun. Not because the seed is inadequate, but because growth is what life does. Now, here's what's important to understand about these three lives. They're interconnected. They support each other. The lie of separation makes you feel isolated and vulnerable. The lie of being a fixed self makes you rigid and defensive. The lie of inadequacy makes you constantly chase after something you think you lack. Together, they create a false sense of identity, what we might call the ego, that's constantly struggling, constantly defending, constantly seeking. And this false self, this ego, built on lies, consumes enormous amounts of energy. It requires constant maintenance, constant reinforcement, constant protection. You have to defend your separateness, maintain your self-image, prove your adequacy. It's exhausting. It's like trying to dam a river. The natural flow of life is wholeness, change, and completeness. But you're constantly expending energy to maintain the illusions of separation, fixity, and lack. But you can't simply decide to stop believing these lies. The ego can't enlighten itself. The false self can't see through its own falsehood. What's required is a different kind of seeing, a shift in awareness that happens not through effort but through relaxation, not through becoming but through recognizing what already is. This is why all the great spiritual traditions, beneath their different forms and languages, point at the same thing. They're all inviting you to see through these fundamental lies. The Buddhist talks about the illusion of the separate self. The Hindu speaks of recognizing your identity with Brahman, with all that is. The Taoist describes flowing with the way things are rather than fighting against life. Jesus spoke of dying to be reborn, of losing your life to find it. They're all pointing at the same recognition. These stories you've believed about yourself, these fundamental assumptions about your nature are not true. And when these lies are seen through, when these illusions dissolve, what remains? Not nothing, not some void or blank emptiness. What remains is what was always there beneath the lies. Simple presence, pure awareness, being itself. You don't become something special. You recognize what you've always been. You don't achieve some extraordinary state. You wake up to the ordinary reality that was hidden by extraordinary delusions. Let me be very practical about this. How do these lies operate in your daily life, and how does seeing through them change your experience? Take the lie of separation. When you believe you're separate, every interaction is a transaction between isolated entities. Relationships become negotiations. You're trying to get what you need from others while protecting yourself from being hurt. There's always this subtle guardedness, this sense of being on one side of a boundary while everyone else is on the other side. But when you see through the lie of separation, relationships transform. You recognize that you're meeting yourself in different forms. The boundary between self and other becomes transparent. There's still the appearance of separateness, still different bodies and personalities, but there's an underlying recognition of unity. Compassion becomes natural because hurting another is recognized as hurting yourself. Love stops being about getting something from someone and becomes about recognizing what you share. Consider the lie of being a fixed self. When you believe you're a consistent, unchanging entity, you become rigid. You have to defend your self-image, your reputation, your identity. If someone criticizes you, it threatens who you think you are. If circumstances change, you resist because it threatens your stability. You're constantly trying to control life to protect this imaginary stable self. But when you see through this lie, there's incredible flexibility. You can be different in different situations without feeling like you're being false. You can change your mind without feeling like you're betraying yourself. You can accept criticism without it devastating you, because you're not identified with a fixed self that could be damaged. You become like water, taking the shape of whatever container you're in, yet always remaining essentially water. And the lie of inadequacy, this one affects every aspect of your life. When you believe you're fundamentally lacking, you're always striving, always seeking, always trying to fill the void. You pursue achievements hoping they'll make you feel worthy. You chase experiences hoping they'll make you feel fulfilled. You seek approval from others hoping it will validate your existence. But nothing ever quite works because you're trying to fill an imaginary hole. When you see through this lie, the striving stops. Not because you become lazy or passive, but because the desperate quality drops away. You still take action, still have preferences, still pursue things, but not from a place of lack. There's a sense of already being fulfilled, and actions arise from that fullness rather than from trying to fill an emptiness. Life becomes play rather than struggle. Now I want to address something important. You might be listening to all this and thinking, okay, I understand intellectually, I can see how these might be lies, but I still experience myself as separate, as a continuous self, as inadequate. How do I stop believing these lies? And this is the crucial point. You can't stop believing them through an act of will. You can't think your way out of these lies. Intellectual understanding is not the same as seeing through the illusion. It's like someone describing to you that the earth is round when you're standing on flat ground. You might accept it intellectually, but your direct experience still shows you flatness. What's needed is a different kind of looking. Not thinking about these things, but observing directly. Not believing new ideas about yourself, but questioning the old ones. Not trying to become awakened, but investigating whether you're already awake and just haven't noticed. Start with the simplest observation. Right now, in this moment, are you actually experiencing separation, or are you experiencing a unified field of awareness in which thoughts, sensations, and perceptions appear? Don't think about it. Just look. Is there actually a separate you experiencing these things, or is there just experiencing happening? Look at this thing you call yourself. Can you actually find it? Where is it? Is it your body, but your body is constantly changing? Is it your thoughts, but thoughts come and go? Is it your memories, but memories are constantly being revised? What is this self you're so sure exists as a continuous entity? And this sense of inadequacy, where does it come from? Is it actually in your direct experience right now? Or is it a thought about yourself, a story you're telling, a comparison you're making? When you're fully absorbed in something, when you're completely present, is there any sense of inadequacy, or does that only appear when you step back and start evaluating yourself? This investigation is not about reaching a conclusion. It's about looking so directly at your experience that the lies become obvious. It's like looking at an optical illusion. Once you see how it works, you can't unsee it. You might still see the illusion, but you're no longer fooled by it. And here's the beautiful thing. You don't have to figure all this out. You don't have to become someone who has seen through the lies. The seeing happens on its own when the conditions are right. Your job is not to achieve some state of enlightenment. Your job is to stop reinforcing the lies, to stop compulsively thinking thoughts that maintain the illusion of separation, fixity, and inadequacy. Every time you notice yourself defending your separate identity, pause. Every time you catch yourself trying to maintain a consistent self-image, pause. Every time you feel that fundamental sense of not being enough, pause. Don't try to change anything. Just notice. Just see what's actually happening. Because the lies are maintained by unconsciousness. They persist because you believe them without questioning. But the moment you bring awareness to them, the moment you actually look directly at the assumption rather than through it, something shifts. Not because you've done something, but because light has been shone on what was hidden in darkness. This is why all the great spiritual teachings emphasize presence, awareness, consciousness, not as something to achieve, but as something to recognize. You are already aware, you are already conscious, you are already present. But you've been so focused on the content of awareness, so caught up in the story, that you've forgotten the awareness itself. And awareness is what you actually are. Not the objects of awareness, not the thoughts and feelings and sensations, but the awareness in which all of these appear. And awareness is not separate. It's not a fixed thing. It's not inadequate. These qualities belong to the objects appearing in awareness, not to awareness itself. When you rest as awareness rather than as the character in the story, the three lies are seen through naturally. There's no separation because awareness is the space in which everything appears. There's no fixed self because awareness is not a thing, but the capacity for things to appear. There's no inadequacy because awareness lacks nothing. It's already the fullness in which everything exists. I want to be very clear. I'm not asking you to believe any of this. Don't take my word for it. Don't make this into a new set of beliefs to replace the old ones. That would just be substituting one lie for another. Instead, investigate. Look at your own experience. Question the assumptions you've been operating under your entire life. The three lies everyone believes about themselves, separation, fixity, and inadequacy, are not your personal failing. They're part of the human condition. They're built into the structure of thought and language. Everyone is subject to them until they're seen through, so there's no blame, no fault. There's simply the possibility of waking up from the dream, of seeing through the story, of recognizing what you've always been beneath the layers of belief. And when that recognition happens, life doesn't stop. You don't float off into some detached state. The person continues, the body continues, the mind continues. But the identification shifts. You're no longer imprisoned by the false sense of self. You're free to be human without believing you're only human. Free to have an identity without being trapped by it. Free to engage with life without the desperate quality that comes from believing you're inadequate. This is the liberation that's available to every human being. Not some special state for special people. Simply the recognition of what's always been true, hidden beneath the...
You see, when we speak of awakening, we often imagine that something extraordinary must happen to us, a blinding revelation, a sudden insight that transforms the ordinary world into some kind of mystical vision. But awakening is not something you acquire, not something you can chase or earn. It is, in fact, the recognition that there was never anything to gain. The strange paradox is that when you stop trying to become awakened, you realize you already are. But, of course, saying that to a person still caught in the game of seeking sounds like nonsense. They want to know how, what to do, what step to take, and yet every step you take to find it only takes you further away, because you are moving in the wrong direction toward effort, toward the future, toward the illusion that there is somewhere to get to. Most of our lives are organized around that illusion. From the moment we begin to think of ourselves as someone, we are told that we must improve, advance, refine, and control. We measure our value by what we can obtain: more money, more knowledge, more love, more approval. Even our spiritual pursuits are infected by this disease of acquisition. We want enlightenment, like we want a new car or a diploma. We imagine that there's a ladder reaching to heaven, and all we need to do is climb faster than the rest. Yet every rung of that ladder is made of smoke, and the higher we go, the less real it all becomes. What awakening reveals is that there is no ladder, no top, no bottom, only the ever-present ground beneath your feet. When one truly awakens, one does not gain new powers or visions. One gains nothing, but in that nothing, everything changes. It is like waking from a dream in which you believed you were starving and suddenly realizing that the hunger was only part of the dream. The food you were chasing was never real, yet you, the dreamer, remain. The great secret is not that you become something different, but that you cease to need to become anything at all. What you gain is not more content in your life, but the quiet recognition of what was always there. Now, of course, our minds don't like that kind of simplicity. We think, surely it can't be that easy. We are addicted to struggle. We believe meaning comes from difficulty, that peace must be earned by effort, that wisdom must be bought with suffering. So when someone tells us that the truth is already present, that we are already free, we think it must be a trick. And so we continue searching, reading books, attending retreats, analyzing our thoughts, all the while overlooking the simple fact that the search itself is the barrier. To seek truth is to affirm its absence, just as to chase happiness is to admit you are unhappy. Awakening is the end of that chase. Imagine, for a moment, a man standing in the middle of a clear pond, frantically scooping at the water with his hands in an attempt to find what he already stands upon. He disturbs the reflection, splashing about, growing more and more frustrated. And then, suddenly, exhausted, he stops. The water settles. The reflection returns. He sees the sky mirrored perfectly beneath him. That moment of stillness, that surrender, is awakening. Not a reward for effort, but the result of exhaustion, the exhaustion of the self that seeks. So, what do you gain when you awaken? You gain the loss of what was never real. You lose the burden of trying to be someone. You gain the simplicity of being no one in particular. You lose the anxiety of time, the endless pushing toward some imagined tomorrow, and you gain the immediacy of this moment. It's not that life suddenly becomes perfect. You still get hungry, tired, lonely. You still laugh, cry, and make mistakes. But the difference is that it all happens within a vast sense of okayness. The storm still rages, but you are no longer in the storm. You are the sky that contains it. The tragedy of modern life is that we are taught to identify with the storm. We say, I am sad, I am angry, I am lost, but these are only passing clouds. You are not your thoughts any more than the ocean is its waves. When one awakens, one doesn't destroy the waves, one simply stops mistaking them for the sea. You realize that behind every rise and fall, there is a quiet stillness that never changes. And from that stillness, life moves effortlessly. You might ask, well then, if I am already this awareness, why don't I feel it? The answer is simple. You are looking for it as though it were an object. You imagine awareness as something that can be experienced, when in fact, it is the very condition for experience itself. You cannot see your own eyes without a mirror, and you cannot perceive awareness as though it were apart from you. So, in our endless attempts to observe, analyze, and define ourselves, we create more mirrors, more reflections, more distortion. But the truth was never hiding. It was simply overlooked because it was too close. That's why, when people awaken, they often laugh. Not because they've discovered something new, but because they realize how absurdly simple it has always been. It's as if you've been tearing the house apart looking for your glasses only to find them perched on your nose. The laughter is the sound of the mind collapsing into humility. It realizes it can't grasp what it is trying to hold because it itself is the thing being held. And so, awakening is not an achievement. It is not the result of discipline or purity or perfection. It is the relaxation of the very effort to reach it. In that relaxation, you discover what was always here, the unshakable presence of being itself. And once that realization dawns, you cannot lose it, because it was never gained. You cannot unsee what has been seen. You cannot unknow the truth that you are the very thing you were seeking. The only thing you can lose is the illusion that you were ever separate from it. Of course, awakening doesn't make you superhuman. You don't float about in a permanent state of bliss. Rather, you become profoundly ordinary. You can drink tea, take a walk, wash the dishes, and yet everything shimmers with a quiet luminosity. The sound of water, the feeling of sunlight, the laughter of a friend, all are sacred. not because they belong to some higher world, but because you finally see them as they are. You stop dividing life into sacred and profane, spiritual and mundane. You realize it was all one dance, one motion, one eternal now. And this is what awakened people gain: not detachment from life, but intimacy with it. They no longer hold themselves apart, judging, comparing, calculating. They are immersed, but not entangled. They act, but without the tension of control. They love, but without possession. They experience pain, but without resistance. The gain is a kind of effortless participation. It is the freedom to be fully human, without pretending to be divine, and yet knowing that the divine was never anywhere else. In our culture, we confuse awakening with escape. We think it means to transcend the human condition, to rise above suffering, to be beyond error. But true awakening is not escape, it is inclusion. It is saying yes to everything, even the parts you once rejected. It is realizing that the darkness, the confusion, the doubt are not mistakes to fix, but aspects of the whole to embrace. You see, the moment you stop trying to edit existence, you discover its perfection. You realize that everything you tried to push away was, in its own way, necessary for the dance to continue. This realization brings a deep compassion, for when you no longer judge yourself for being flawed, you no longer judge others for being asleep. You see them as you once were, caught in the same beautiful confusion, dreaming the same dream of control and separation. And so, instead of trying to wake them up, you simply love them. You let them be, because you understand that even their struggle is part of awakening. After all, you cannot wake from a dream you've never had. As you awaken, what you gain is not certainty, but trust. The old craving for answers dissolves, replaced by a quiet confidence that you don't need them. You no longer demand that the universe explain itself. You live as the question, open, alive, curious. You no longer seek security in belief or identity. You rest in the unknown and find that it holds you. What you gain is not knowledge, but wisdom, the kind that doesn't cling to conclusions. And what's most surprising is how utterly simple life becomes. You see, simplicity is not the absence of complexity, but the absence of conflict. When the self stops arguing with reality, everything falls into harmony. You no longer feel divided between what is and what should be. You stop rehearsing your life and begin to live it. You stop analyzing your feelings and begin to feel them. You stop searching for love and discover you are its source. This simplicity cannot be taught through philosophy. It has to be seen. It's like a mirror that reflects everything but holds on to nothing. The awakened person moves through life like that, reflecting, responding, dancing, yet untouched by the passing images. They have not withdrawn from life. They are more alive than ever, because they no longer resist it. So the great gain of awakening is the loss of struggle. The gain is the peace that comes when you stop trying to fix the world and instead allow it to unfold. The gain is the return to innocence, the unlearned trust of a child who plays without purpose, loves without calculation, and cries without shame. To awaken is to rediscover that innocence in the heart of wisdom, to see with clear eyes and still say yes to it all. And so, my friends, what you gain when you awaken is not something you can hold, not something you can show or prove. You gain a way of being, a way of seeing that transforms every ordinary act into a miracle. You gain the silence between thoughts, the stillness beneath movement, the presence within absence. You gain yourself not as an object, but as the ungraspable awareness that has always been here, waiting for you to stop searching long enough to notice. And when you begin to see this clearly, something very gentle starts to happen to your relationship with life. You stop treating it as a problem to solve, and you start listening to it like you might listen to music. You notice that each moment has its own melody, its own texture, and that you are not standing apart from it. You are the very rhythm itself, moving and changing, rising and falling, breathing in and out. To live awakened is to live musically, not mechanically. It's to sense that everything that happens, no matter how apparently chaotic, fits perfectly into the larger harmony. The mind, of course, will protest. It wants to hold on, to define, to plan. It will say, yes, but what about tomorrow? What about my responsibilities, my dreams, my losses? And the answer, you see, is not to reject those concerns, but to notice that they too are part of the music. The melody includes the dissonance, the unresolved chords, the tension that makes the release so beautiful. Without them, the song would be flat and lifeless. The awakened person does not demand that life always sounds sweet. They understand that even the sour notes belong to the composition. This changes how you relate to suffering. You begin to see that pain, fear, confusion, they are not punishments, nor signs that you've done something wrong. They are movements in the great symphony of existence. And when you stop resisting them, they transform. You see the difference between pain and the resistance to pain. Pain simply arises and passes. Resistance lingers, echoing, amplifying, creating stories. The more you fight it, the deeper it digs in. The moment you allow it, the moment you say yes to even this, it begins to dissolve. Awareness itself is the cure. Now, there is something profoundly tender about that discovery, because for the first time, you stop running away from yourself. You no longer divide your inner world into good and bad, acceptable and shameful. You see that the parts you once rejected were never enemies at all. They were lost children waiting to be seen. And so, you stop trying to purify yourself into some ideal version of a spiritual being, and you begin to love the human one instead. You begin to understand that the divine expresses itself precisely through imperfection. The crack in the bowl is what allows the light to shine through. And as you grow into that understanding, something unexpected emerges humor. You begin to laugh at the whole cosmic joke. You laugh at how serious you once were, how desperately you tried to be enlightened, how tightly you clung to the very ideas that kept you trapped. You laugh because you see the absurdity of trying to control what was never yours to control. You laugh, and in that laughter, the walls collapse. The divine play, the Leela, as they call it in Sanskrit, becomes obvious. The world is not a machine grinding toward an end. It's a dance of energy, endlessly creating and dissolving itself, and you are both the dancer and the dance. When you awaken to that, the quality of your relationships also changes. You no longer approach others as instruments to your happiness. You see them as reflections of yourself, not metaphorically, but literally. You realize that there is only one awareness appearing as many points of view. So when you meet another person, you are meeting a different expression of the same being. This recognition gives rise to an effortless compassion. You no longer need to forgive because there is nothing left to accuse. You no longer need to prove because there is nothing to defend. You relate from a space of quiet understanding, free of demand. And yet, this doesn't mean you become passive or indifferent. You still speak truth, you still act, you still set boundaries when necessary, but you do it without hatred, without the need to conquer or justify. Your actions arise like waves from the ocean, spontaneous, appropriate, alive. You respond instead of reacting. You participate instead of controlling. And in that way, every interaction becomes sacred, because it is no longer about getting something. It's about recognizing what's already shared. Many people imagine that awakening makes life easier, but in truth, it simply makes it real. You still face loss, illness, conflict, disappointment. The difference is that you no longer interpret these as personal failures. You see them as part of the unfolding. You stop asking, why is this happening to me? And begin to ask, what is this showing me? The awakened person doesn't avoid storms. They learn to dance in the rain, because the rain is also part of the song. In this openness, your sense of time begins to shift. You notice that the past and the future are no longer as heavy as they once were. They appear like faint ripples across the vast stillness of now. You realize that what you called past is just memory arising in the present, and what you call future is imagination appearing here too. Everything is happening now, and this now has no edge. It is infinite, boundless, ungraspable. You stop trying to live in the moment, because you see there is nothing outside of it. The idea of living in the present becomes redundant. You are the present. When that realization dawns, anxiety begins to fade. Because anxiety always depends on time. It depends on imagining a future you must prepare for or a past you must fix. Without that timeline, fear loses its foundation. You find a quiet confidence that whatever arises will be met when it comes. You no longer need to prepare for life because you are life. And this brings with it a kind of softness, a grace. You stop pushing so hard. You stop running so fast. You start to trust the natural intelligence that beats your heart, that breathes your lungs, that turns night into day without your permission. This trust is what many traditions call faith. But it's not faith in a concept or a distant deity. It's faith in the living reality of existence itself. You begin to notice how everything works together in mysterious balance, the way pain deepens compassion, the way endings give rise to beginnings, the way loss opens space for renewal. You see that you don't need to understand it all. You can rest in the mystery, because the mystery is not against you, it is you. This resting brings about a deep stillness, even in motion. You can be busy yet peaceful, involved yet free. You no longer need to withdraw to find silence. The silence is within you wherever you go. It's the silence between the notes, the space that allows the music to be heard. The awakened person doesn't reject the world, they listen to it differently. They hear the divine rhythm in traffic noise, in children's laughter, in their own heartbeat. Everything becomes a kind of meditation, not because they are trying to be mindful, but because they can no longer help it. And gradually, a shift occurs in your motivation. You stop living to prove yourself, to accumulate, to win. You live because living itself is the play of existence. You work, you rest, you create, not out of fear or ambition, but out of the sheer joy of participation. You become like an artist painting without needing to finish the picture, knowing that the act of painting is the beauty itself. You stop striving for purpose, because you see that life doesn't have one in the way you imagined. Life is not a journey toward meaning, it is the meaning. And the more you try to impose meaning on it, the more it slips away. So what you gain when you awaken is the freedom to live without needing a reason. You are no longer driven by the anxious question of what am I supposed to do? You do what feels alive, and that aliveness becomes your compass. You realize that meaning is not found, it is expressed. Every moment you live authentically, every breath you take in awareness, is meaning itself unfolding. The awakened life is not a life of answers, but of pure response, spontaneous, creative, full of wonder. And in this simplicity, something miraculous happens. You begin to fall in love with everything. Not a sentimental love, not an emotional clinging, but a deep appreciation for the astonishing fact that anything exists at all. You walk through the world as if seeing it for the first time. The light on water, the sound of footsteps, the scent of rain, each becomes a portal to the infinite. You realize that existence doesn't need improvement. It needs only to be seen. To awaken is to see. But this seeing is not separate from doing. It's not the lazy detachment of someone who says it's all an illusion. It's the vivid engagement of someone who says it's all alive. You live fully because you no longer fear loss. You give fully because you no longer fear lack. You die to each moment, gladly, because you know you will rise in the next. That is what makes the awakened life so radiant. It's not an escape from death, but a dance with it. And this brings us to one of the greatest paradoxes. The awakened person gains the ability to lose completely. They are not afraid of endings because they know there are none. Every ending is just the beginning of another form. Just as a wave falls back into the sea only to rise again, you see that what you truly are cannot be diminished. What you gain when you awaken is the understanding that loss itself is part of wholeness, that even disappearance is a kind of presence. And so you stop hoarding moments. You stop clinging to experiences, people, even memories. You learn the art of letting things pass through you. You become transparent, like glass, allowing light to move freely. You are no longer heavy with the weight of what was or what could be. You are light, fluid, open. You are, in every sense, free. And it is in that freedom that the deepest joy emerges, not the fleeting happiness that depends on conditions, but the uncaused joy that arises simply because you are. It is not a joy that needs to shout. It hums quietly beneath all things. You feel it when you breathe, when you watch a bird take flight, when you smile for no reason. It is the joy of being itself, which cannot be taken, cannot be taught, cannot be lost. That, my friends, is the gain that never fades, the gain that was never earned, the gain that was always yours. When you begin to live from this space, you find that the whole experience of being human becomes lighter. Not easier in the sense of less demanding, but lighter in spirit. You can carry the same burdens as before, but they no longer weigh upon you in the same way. The heaviness was never in the burden itself. It was in the illusion that you were carrying it alone. The moment you see that you are the life that carries itself, the burden dissolves. Effort still exists, but the strain disappears. It is like dancing. The steps may be complex, but when you let the rhythm guide you, it no longer feels like work. Now you might say, but what about my responsibilities? What about the real challenges of life? And of course they remain. But the difference is that you meet them from a different place. You respond not from fear or obligation, but from clarity. When the mind is no longer clouded by anxiety and control, wisdom arises naturally. You see what needs to be done, and you do it without the constant commentary of self-judgment. Life moves through you with its own intelligence. You become, as it were, an instrument that plays itself. This is why the awakened person seems calm even amidst chaos. It's not that they are numb or detached. On the contrary, they feel everything more vividly than ever before. But because they no longer identify with every passing thought or emotion, they are not drowned by them. Emotions come and go like weather over the landscape, but the sky itself remains untroubled. You become that sky, and once you see yourself as the sky, you stop trying to control the clouds. You let them drift, you let them rain, you let them shine, and everything finds its place. You might notice, too, that your sense of identity begins to loosen. You no longer cling so tightly to the story of who you think you are. You stop being so certain about what defines you, because you realize that identity is not fixed. It's a process, a dance of appearances. One moment you are a teacher, another a friend, another a stranger passing by. And all these roles, though temporary, are expressions of the same consciousness. You don't have to pick one and make it permanent. You can be all of them and none of them at once. That is true freedom. It's a curious thing, but when you stop taking yourself so seriously, the universe begins to reveal its sense of humor. You start to see how the grand drama of human existence is, in a way, a play. Each of us plays our part, the hero, the fool, the lover, the skeptic, and the beauty of it is that the roles keep changing. The trouble begins when we forget it's a play. When we start believing we are the mask, we suffer. But the moment you remember, you can laugh again. You can enjoy the performance, even when it's tragic, because you know the essence behind it is untouchable. This is what many spiritual traditions mean when they talk about detachment. It's not coldness or indifference. It's the warmth of knowing that you are safe, even when things appear to fall apart. You can let the waves crash because you know you are the ocean. You can let the story twist and turn because you know you are the storyteller. And once you understand that, fear loses its grip entirely. For how can the ocean be afraid of the wave? How can the storyteller be afraid of the plot? From that space, love takes on a new dimension. It's no longer a transaction, no longer a search for completion. It becomes a natural state of being. You love not because of what you get, but because that is what life does when it knows itself. You find yourself moved by compassion, not out of duty, but out of recognition. You see yourself in everything, in the stranger's eyes, in the trembling leaf, in the child's laughter, in the grief of loss. Love becomes as effortless as breathing. And this love cannot be lost because it was never dependent on conditions. It flows because you exist. And then comes the greatest paradox of all. The more you surrender your life, the more alive you feel. The more you release your need to control, the more powerful you become. Because power, in its truest sense, is not domination, it's alignment. It's the power of the river that moves mountains, not by force, but by persistence. The awakened person is like that river. They don't fight obstacles, they flow around them. They don't resist change, they become change. They move with such ease that what once seemed impossible now happens effortlessly. That is the gain that can never be lost, the power that comes from no longer needing to be powerful. And as you live in this way, you begin to see that everything that happens, even what seems terrible or senseless, fits perfectly into the whole. You stop asking, why me? And begin to ask, why not me? For you are part of the total movement of life. You are not a mistake in it, you are it. This realization does not make you passive, it makes you deeply alive. You become more responsive, more present, more in tune with the subtle cues of existence. You begin to sense what life is asking of you in each moment, and you respond naturally without hesitation. You don't have to plan your authenticity. It simply expresses itself. Sometimes people think awakening will make them separate from the world, as though they will float above it all in eternal peace. But the truth is just the opposite. Awakening brings you closer to everything. You begin to taste the rawness of life, the salt and the sweetness together. You cry more easily, laugh more deeply, love more honestly, because you are no longer afraid of feeling. You are no longer hiding behind defenses. You are open, unguarded, and that vulnerability is strength itself. You discover that to be fully human is not to escape life, but to embrace it completely. Now, you may wonder, if everything is perfect as it is, what's the point of doing anything at all? Why act? Why strive? Why care? And the answer is very simple, because that is what life does. Life creates, moves, evolves, and expresses itself endlessly. The awakened person does not act to reach a goal. They act because it is their nature to do so. The flower blooms not to impress anyone, but because blooming is what it does. The bird sings not to win applause, but because song is its essence. In the same way, your actions, when aligned with awareness, are no longer forced. They are spontaneous expressions of life's intelligence. They need no justification. This is what true purpose feels like. Not a rigid plan, but a flowing expression. You realize that you don't need to find your purpose. You need only to remove the noise that hides it. The purpose of life is not something given to you. It is what you give to life through your being. Every smile, every act of kindness, every moment of awareness is an offering. You are not here to conquer the world. You are here to be the world in conscious form. And slowly, gratitude begins to color everything you experience. You start to feel thankful even for the ordinary, the mundane, the things you once ignored. You wake up in the morning and notice the warmth of the blanket, the sound of the wind, the breath in your lungs. You realize that every single moment is a gift, not because it's pleasant, but because it exists. Gratitude is the natural fragrance of awareness. You don't have to practice it. It arises effortlessly when you are truly present. It's not something you say, it's something you feel in your bones. As this gratitude deepens, life becomes luminous. Even the simplest actions shine with quiet significance. Drinking a cup of tea, watching the sky change color, walking down the street, each becomes an act of participation in the mystery. You begin to see that enlightenment was never about escaping the world, but about seeing it clearly, seeing it as divine, even in its ordinariness. The awakened person doesn't need to go anywhere else. Heaven is not a destination. It's the realization that this, right now, is sacred. And then one day, without fanfare, you find that your search has ended. You no longer wake up asking, "How do I become awakened?" Because you understand that there was never anyone to awaken. The seeker and the sought were one and the same all along. The game of becoming has dissolved, leaving only being, and being is enough. You no longer measure your worth by what you achieve or what others see. You rest in the quiet certainty that to exist is the ultimate success. This, you see, is what awakened people gain that they can never lose. It's not a special state, not a mystical power, but a simple, profound intimacy with life. The gain is not something added, it's the removal of the illusion that you ever lacked. You have always been whole, always been free, always been the dance itself. The clouds may come and go, but the sky remains untouched. So what does it mean, really, to awaken? It means to stop pretending, to stop chasing the mirage of a future that never arrives, to stop believing that happiness depends on what happens. It means to relax into the mystery, to trust the unfolding, to realize that this moment, just as it is, contains the entire universe. You have nothing to gain because you were never missing anything. And in that realization, the search ends, not with a bang, but with a smile. That is the quiet laughter of awakening. It is the sound of life recognizing itself. It is the joy of a wave, realizing it was never separate from the sea. And once you hear that laughter, truly hear it, you know there is nothing left to fear, nothing left to chase, nothing left to lose. You are home, and you always were.